Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Eccentric, the makers of the K-Box and the new K-Pulley. Guys, flywheel training's really grown in popularity of late, and although it's something that's been around for a while, the simple reason that it's grown in popularity is because it works. We've been lucky to have a K-Box in our weight room for the past 3 years, and we've seen some really great things when it comes to improving the athlete's ability to change direction, and then looking at our return to play protocols with different lower body injuries with the student athletes. The love-hate relationship that everyone has with the K-Box is now just going to grow more with the addition of the K-Pulley. The ability to do standing presses, pulls, rip-throughs, and knee drive exercises is just going to be another arsenal to our training and another addition to the love-hate relationship that our student athletes have with the awesome tools that come from Eccentric. Go ahead and hop over to eccentric.com today to check out what they have. Guys, I can't recommend it enough, and I guarantee you won't be disappointed, not just with the products, but with the awesome customer service that Eccentric provides. Hey everybody, if you enjoy the podcast and the content it provides, be sure to hop over and check out the community. The community is an exclusive members website that is just an extension of what we do here in July at the Central Virginia Sport Performance Seminar. What it is a combination of video lectures, a coach's corner with your Monday morning take-home information, and a forum where you can talk about anything and everything related to the field of strength and conditioning. In the community, you'll find content added each month from some of the top practitioners in the world, ranging from PhDs to high-level coaches, bringing you exactly what they're doing with their athletes or their research at the present moment. On top of that, an additional discussion by coaches bringing you that Monday morning information, things that you can add to your training program right away. Tying that in with the opportunity to discuss with coaches around the world in the forum on anything and everything from the topics addressed in these presentations to whatever you're seeing in your daily life as a coach. If this sounds like the right thing for you and your staff, go ahead and hop over to cvasps.com/community and try it out for 48 hours for just $1. If you like it, you're signed up, ready to roll, and you're jumping into all the great content added each month. If not, feel free to go ahead and cancel at any time. No questions asked. We're really excited about what we're building in the community and hope you are too. Go ahead and hop over to cvasps.com/community and check it out today. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, we have an absolutely killer talk with Bruce Babashan talking boxing, training, and the development of both the fight game and strength and conditioning. Coach Babashan cut his teeth down in College Park back in the 80s, and he's been in the strength game and the fight game for a minute now, and he's working with some world-class fighters up in Maryland. And guys, this is really some cool stuff talking about training, both the physical and the mental aspects of it, and how all of it works together to impact his fighters. This is really an awesome talk, guys. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Let's get right to it. Coach, thank you so much for spending the time with us today.
It's my pleasure, man. I'm honored to have the opportunity.
Well, here, since we don't have a face to go with the talk right now, how about we introduce you to who we're listening to here, give a little background, and tell us how you got to where you're at right now.
Sure. My name's Bruce Babashan. I'm a professional boxing coach and trainer. I've been doing that for about 2 decades. My journey to that process, my journey to that job was long. I started off, played high school football and, baseball, college baseball, got out of baseball after I was done college. Wanted to, contest. Still had the competitive warrior spirit in me. Lifted weights. I was a competitive power lifter. I was a competitive bodybuilder. And, competed on a regular basis in both sports, got a job, actually walked into had a friend of mine who, was on the University of Maryland football team. And he had tested out. He was the top squatter that particular year. I think he did 605 for 3. And, he invited me to the gym, the training house, the field house at Maryland. So I walked in, I weighed about 230 and I ended up, squatting 6 1/4 for 3 without much effort, with just a belt and wraps. And so the head coach at the time, a guy named Frank Costello, who's one of the truly, one of the founding fathers of what we understand today as, sports conditioning and really was way ahead of the game. He was Frank was the first guy that went over to Europe. He was a strength and conditioning coach, but he was really a speed coach, developed Ronaldo Nehemiah, if anybody remembers that name, back in the 80s. But Frank was the guy that really was on the cutting edge of introducing, strength training at a high, sophisticated level into college football. At one time, Maryland's program was absolutely on the cutting edge. Frank had gone to Eastern Europe, learned all about the plyometric programs they were doing, brought all that knowledge back. So Frank offered me a job. I worked for Coach Bobby Ross his last year, and then Coach Krivak over at Maryland his first year. Then the program, changed faces, and the program changed. And so I had this background in strength training, but during that time, I personally just needed to find something else. So I walked into the boxing gym because it was something I always liked to do, and just fell in love with it instantly. And it was just a guy would go in every day before work and spar, and guy would come in after work. So I was very obsessed with it and not particularly gifted at it. And I kept my mouth shut and listened to the coaches that were in there teaching the real gifted athletes, the athletes who really had a potential to be something in the sport, and learned and picked up a lot and developed sort of a nice reputation for myself as a good sparring partner, as a fairly knowledgeable guy. And that continued, and eventually, organically, I would be in the gym, and, the kids who were less talented, who weren't getting the time and attention of the coaches, would gravitate towards the guy who was next in line in terms of age, which was me. I was an older guy. I wasn't in my prime anymore. There was no real long-term possibility for me to be successful in the sport of boxing. I was just in there working. I was a gym rat. And I started coaching kids who had nobody else to coach them. And, from that process, from that sort of experience, it grew over the course of years and years. And as I learned more and as my athletes performed better, my reputation grew, and it grew into where we're at today. And today I train kids from around the world. Last Olympic cycle, the Philippine government hired me, and they sent their Olympians to me here in the United States prior to the last games in Rio to prepare them, for the games. I trained professionals at every level in the sport. And currently my top kid, his name's Alexandru Marin. He's ranked in the top 10 in the world. He'll be fighting on HBO in September 8th in the Superfly event. So it all started with a very humble beginning, actually started in the weight room, and, kind of grew from there. And I was able to apply the things that Frank taught me and the things that I picked up along the way to my fighters, which has given me a distinct advantage, I think, over other coaches. So that's really my journey.
No, and that's fascinating to go from, College Park, Maryland to the Olympics in a different realm.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. At the time, there used to be a guy at Maryland. His name, he preceded me, but his name was Pete Koch, and he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And he was the next thing. I think that's what they called him. He was sort of this next generation athlete. That he was actually in a movie called Heartbreak Ridge with Clint Eastwood. He was a guy called the Swede, but he was this physical phenom. I mean, he preceded me, but he was emblematic of what Frank Costello was building there at Maryland. And, we had cutting edge facilities at the time. Boomer Scienson had donated a lot of stuff to the program. And we had, at the time, in the early 80s, we had a really sophisticated cutting edge program. But frankly, this was exercise science in its infancy. The Eastern Europeans were way ahead of America in this field of study was fairly new. It was burgeoning. When I am around guys like you and guys like Coach Cavanaugh and guys that are really steeped in this today, I realize to a large degree that that the strength and conditioning has really evolved into a real practical science, a difference maker. And it's really has been fascinating to be at sort of there. I was sort of country before country was cool, and then to see where you guys are at today. It's really fascinating, and it's quite gratifying to see that this area of expertise has come into its own, so to speak. So yeah, man, it's been a pretty cool gig here.
Oh, I'm sure. And let's just keep running with that. Let's talk about some of that
Sure.
evolution. So what have you seen, I mean, especially in the fight game, since that's really what you're immersed
Right.
in right now. Like, how has that
Right.
evolved? How has that moved forward?
Well, what's interesting is, the fight game is both on the cutting edge and also behind the times. And so that seems at odds with one another, but it's really not, because boxing is a sport of haves and have-nots. And so at the elite level, where there is the athletes are fighting for big purses and there's lots of money at stake, these athletes get access to the highest, most sophisticated levels of training and conditioning. At the lower levels, where there is no money at stake, where guys and gals are sort of making their bones and are working their way up, they have access to only the coaches who they have in their gym. And oftentimes, those coaches are not very sophisticated in the ways of, you'll hear coaches say things that are, 30, 40 years out of date, but that's what they know. And so, when you watch boxing, if you watch, the HBO show 24/7, they'll show the guys in the hyperbaric chambers, they'll show the guys training in altitude tents. I mean, the whole phenomena of altitude masks really emanated from, some of the footage that started on 24/7 with the Mexican fighters training at altitude, then wearing the altitude masks, which quite frankly is got some dubious results in terms of whether it's effective or not, in terms of the way it's being used by the masks, because I'm not sure that really creates hypoxia. But they have now oxygen tents, where you go into these tents, they have they create these false environments. So at the very cutting edge of boxing, you are dealing with guys and coaches and strength coaches and nutritionists who are at the cutting edge of the sports of the industry. Weight loss and in MMA and boxing is legendary. But weight loss and maintaining performance. I mean, it's so aggressive now that the state commissions are having to rethink the policy of, is it unfair? The rehydration process for fighters, can often be, 10, 15%, 20% of their body weight, which seems extraordinary.
Yeah.
But, the science has gotten to the point now where these guys are able to, lose weight and then put it back on in 24 hours and still maintain extremely high levels of performance. So early on in boxing, it was in fighting, it's what you see everywhere. It's lifting and running. And, whoever's your coach at the time, whoever's your coach, you kind of do what he says. And, there's this whole, you don't want to build too much muscle. And that's what you hear when you're in the gym, as if muscle's the enemy, from the old school. But then when you get into the more elite level athletes, it's really a quest for balance and performance and specificity. Although I will say that it's been my experience that finding the right strength conditioning coach and working with the right folks is a challenge, because a lot of guys in the industry, a lot of gals in the industry want to show you what they know, more than do what's in the best interest of the athlete. Oftentimes don't know and say they do. Oftentimes overcomplicate something that should be far more simple than it is. And oftentimes want to put their own moniker on it, when the truth is that, what that particular fighter needs or that particular athlete needs is something very simple and basic. On the other hand, when you're trying to squeeze that 0.1% out of a guy or gal, because that's going to make the difference, you got to have the most sophisticated and you got to have the best coaches. So over the course of the past 20 years, I would say, boxing and the fighting sports and the combat sports have been both on the cutting edge, but at the same time have been oftentimes way behind the times in terms of what the general athlete is getting exposed to as opposed to what the elite athletes. So there really is a dichotomy there, a real difference there.
No, and I could see that, from afar being an issue. So do you guys have a strength coach that you work with directly? And if so, how did you select that person?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, for years I did it. And the one thing as a coach is that, first of all, it's you can't do it all. I also coach high school football, and the most important thing about high school football team besides the athletes themselves is the staff. So people don't think of fighting as having a staff, but I really do. I have a very, very, very strong team that's behind us, and that involves our nutritionist Mary Perry, that involves our strength coach Justin Cooper, that involves our team trainers, and so we build around the athlete, and I do this based on trust. I know enough. I'm very humble in my knowledge about this stuff because when I go out and I try and stay abreast of everything, but when I see, what your generation of coach knows, when I see what your generation of coach has gone through in terms of education, it supersedes my generation. It's at a whole nother level, but I know enough to be selective, and I know enough to, uncover the BS. And also I know enough to see whether or not that particular coach fits within our team. The strength and conditioning coach is the culture builder in most organizations, certainly in football, but in boxing and fighting, he's the culture builder. She's the culture builder. And, they get a great deal of time with the athlete. So if I'm training the fighter with fighting, and then I'm also the strength and conditioning coach, I can tell you I can wear an athlete out. I'm always, I'm an old school guy, and I'm constantly on them. And, they need a break from me. And what they need is a strength conditioning coach, which, this is really an important issue, because fighting among many sports, but maybe to a greater degree, maybe not, but I can say that within fighting, your faith in your coach is a gigantic factor going in, because, during the fight, if it's a real fight, they're going to have to dig deep, and they're going to have to rely on what they believe in. And if they believe in their strength and conditioning coach, and they believe they're in shape, when it comes time, they'll give you that extra 0.5% that you need. If they don't believe in their strength and conditioning coach, it's evident, and they'll feel tired. The psychology of fighting is one you really have to manage. So, I go about the process of selecting my coaches based on, one, their knowledge. Two, are they willing to share their knowledge with the team? Are they a team player? Will they work with our nutritionist? Will they work with me? Will they be flexible in the schedule? Because oftentimes, sparring requires, next week we're going to Philadelphia, and then the week after that we're headed over to Baltimore. Then we go back up to Philadelphia. The strength conditioning coach likes to have his schedule laid out for that week. Well, that doesn't work all the time in fighting, because you got to go where the activity is. So, I need a guy or a gal who's flexible. I need a guy or gal who's not going to try and be a mad scientist with the athlete either. The kids at the elite level, you better know your shit, because you're messing with the kid's career and his livelihood and how he feeds his family, and you better not experiment with him and get it wrong. So, you have to really, the young man we work with now, Justin Cooper, I went and I met him, I watched him, I went to see athletes he worked with. I talked, I interviewed him several times. I had him come over to the gym. I had him work with the fighters so I could see them work with the fighters, how he interacted with them. I actually videotaped him working with the fighters. And then I sent in, secret shoppers, what they call that. I sent in other people to watch how the workout goes when I'm not around, to see if he's pushing, if he can push the right buttons. So part of it is, look, they have to have the knowledge. They have to have the disposition to fit into the team structure. but they also need to be a coach that can push the right buttons and know when to push those buttons. The strength conditioning coach, in my view, and maybe I'm biased in this because I have a little bit of heritage in this, and a little bit of history in this, is by far one of the most important parts of any sports program that there is, whether it's in football or in my sport, boxing. And so, that's probably the second most important person, because of, they are building bodies, but they're building confidence. And I can only tell you that in a fight, in the crucible, the kid needs to believe that he's ready, he's in shape, that he can go. And when the championship round comes around, and he is dead tired on the stool, and he has to dig deep, he has to have extreme confidence in what he's been through. And that's not an easy thing. That's not just a nuts and bolts thing. That's just not an academic thing. That's a coach who's ingrained himself in the psyche of my athlete. And that's the guy or gal that I look for. And the young man that we have right now is extremely knowledgeable, but he is into the psyche of my athlete. My athlete totally, unequivocally has faith in him, that he is prepared for the fight. And that is a big difference in the sport. I can tell you, it's a big difference in the performance.
I love it, Bruce. I really do. Now let's run down that rabbit hole a little bit, because you brought up three different things when it comes to the mental capacity, when it comes to being a fighter.
Right.
How, as the one that oversees all of that, how do you monitor and build and drive that? Do we want to call it toughness? Do we want to call it belief? Do we want to call it trust? Or is it each one of those their own thing? I mean, how does that work in the fight game?
So, first and foremost, I was watching. There's a great boxing trainer that everybody's aware of. His name's Freddie Roach. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's fairly popular. He's Manny Pacquiao's trainer, and I was listening to him talk one day, and he said something that you have your private thoughts and you think, oh my God, he's so right. So first and foremost, he said, look, if Manny Pacquiao never walked into my gym, you might never know who Freddie Roach is. And the point that he was trying to make is that, so much of, in fighting, so much of the coach is really dictated by the athlete. You can coach against everything but talent. You can plan, you can scheme, you can strategize. We do film breakdown. We have a fight plan. We have it all. But at the end of the day, you got to have the talent. You got to have some kid. And I'll just use this kid, the current kid that I mentioned earlier today, because his story is so powerful and it goes to your question. How do I build mental toughness into that kid? We have a process in the gym. We have a culture in the gym that all sort of lends itself to building a young man or young woman's confidence. And I know you've run across these guys and gals, Coach, that it really needs to reside deep within the athlete themselves. There are certain athletes that have this deep and profound belief in themselves, that no matter what the circumstance, they'll find a way to get out of it. They'll find a way to win no matter what the circumstance. And that is a very hard thing to teach. That's a very hard thing to cultivate. You want to cultivate that. You want to nurture that. You want to find that. But the truth is that a great deal of what makes a great coach is a great athlete, and a great deal of what makes a great athlete is born into them and can't be coached in. Now that aside, that statement aside, everything we do in a camp is designed to build towards a moment, is to build towards an event. At the very top of the game, the kid will only fight for 36 minutes. At the very top, he's only going to fight for 36 minutes. That's 12 rounds. And so you've got to train a kid, and you've got to spend, let's say a short camp is 6 weeks, a normal camp's 8 weeks, a long camp is 10 weeks. And you also want to assume that the kid has fought 2 or 3, 4 times that year, so he's never out of shape or she's never out of shape. So, you're building in that 8-10 week period. Every step you take is building towards that single day and that single 36 minutes. So you start stair-stepping their sparring. You start putting them in tougher and tougher with bigger and bigger, better names. You start building their confidence. You start building all of those things that really surround an athlete in a fight mentally. And you're sort of focusing everything towards that 36 minutes on that specific night. The sport and conditioning is the strength conditioning is the exact same way. You start out at camp one way, but you're really pointing towards a very, very, very specific 36 minutes. And in fighting, unlike, let's say, football, like I said, I'm a high school football coach, but the intensity of the competition is quite different, especially at the elite level. That 36 minutes is it's not just that you're competing against somebody. Is that during that 36 minutes, somebody's taking something from you at the same time. And, being out there and competing at a high level, but also getting damaged, moment by moment, you have to really, really, really have the mental fortitude to work through that. And I've seen very strong men and women cave under that pressure, and anybody will cave under enough pressure. There's no, there is nobody that doesn't have a limit. But you're trying to constantly force that limit back, and you're trying to force that limit back by building a sense of confidence within that athlete. And you do that by specifically cycling everything they do towards a specific moment. And then, part of that confidence, coach, comes from, there's this thing I call the law of equitable exchange. And we don't really, we don't name it, but we know it in our hearts to be true that, you have to suffer in proportion to the goal that you seek. And that part of building confidence, part of building readiness, part of building that ability in the crucible to, find the extra gear is to impart suffering upon your athlete and let them know they're suffering for this purpose. Suffering without, we don't want to be disconnected, but we go out of our way to make the athlete suffer, and we do that specifically so that at the time of the fight, they know that they have paid the price in proportion to what they seek. And, in our gym, we call that the law of equitable exchange. So, it's a process of continually pointing and focusing everything you say and do, and you're taking all the training, but you're actually focused a great deal on the suffering. And I don't mean that you push a kid beyond his physical limits till you get him injured. And I don't mean, but you do, within the confines of the work, within the confines of the process, you try and make them suffer and be aware of the suffering. And that's really an important component piece for building confidence and building readiness, because these kids all know, look, when that Oscar De La Hoya said something one time I never forgot. He said, somebody asked him, what does the opening bell mean to you? He goes, undeniable reality. And
that's
when
an
that
awesome
opening
quote.
bell, yes. When that bell sounds, and it's interesting because, I love football. It's probably my, I love football. I'm one of those guys that will watch on Saturday. I'll sit down and watch every college football game there is, and I'll root for, East Texas State or whoever it has. I just love college football. I love the whole tribal experience. I think it's a fantastic thing. But I will tell you personally, that walk to the ring is incredible. And when you have prepared an athlete and it's a good stage. This kid will be fighting at the Superfly event in the LA Forum on September 8th. That walk to the ring, is part of the process, is part of the reward, is part of the, the mental process getting this kid ready. Look, you can see all the hype and all the music, but there's an internal dialogue going on. There's an internal dialogue, and if you watch real closely, you'll see a coach and an athlete sharing words, sharing looks, and that's all part of that process of getting that kid tuned up just right for that moment. And so to answer your question, Coach, it's a process of continually pointing and focusing your athlete on a specific point and reminding them moment by moment that they have to suffer for this and that their suffering has value. It's not suffering for the sake of suffering, that the suffering has value. And in that process, they gain their confidence.
I love it. So it's all designed, it's all periodized, it's all programmed, it's all moving forward.
Absolutely.
And there's days that are going to be hard.
Just going to be hard. And we have, every day or every week, it's really every Thursday I review the charts. I review the workouts, I review the lifts, I review the recovery rates. Much of what we focus on is recovery, how fast. That's how we judge whether or not the athlete's getting ready or not. So oftentimes we will use a treadmill movement where we'll actually have the kid run for a series of 4 to 6 rounds, and every minute and every round is harder than the previous minute, and every round is harder than the previous round. And we chart this, and what we do is we look how long does it take that fighter once he stops between rounds for his heart rate to return back to 65%. And we can tell almost to pinpoint. We can almost be dead on accurate whether or not we have peaked him or slightly overtrained him or slightly undertrained her or whatever it happens to be. And so we do all of that. But all of that's interlaced with, the psychology of even the periodization. Everything we do, it's attached to the nomenclature of the fight. So, we have charts. I mean, everything we do is documented. I know what happened the fight before, and I know what happened the fight before that. Every day we have a weigh-in. Every morning I know exactly, the kid weighed today, he weighed 124.6. Yesterday he weighed 124.8. Everything is documented, everything. But at the end of the day, you have to mix all that. The great coaches, the great strength conditioning coaches that I know, they're really able to mix the psychology with the science. And once you do that, man, you're building a beast. You're building a beast.
No doubt about it. Well, Coach, I can't thank you enough for this. Bruce, this is fantastic stuff. And people are going to love this. I can't wait to get this live here in a week or so.
Well, listen, it was a pleasure. I was honored to have the opportunity to participate, and to be on. I follow the show. It's great. I learn a lot. I'm a fan, and I listen to it. And so it was my pleasure, and I truly, truly, truly appreciate the opportunity you gave me.
Well, I appreciate that, Coach. Best of luck on the 25th. We'll be watching.
All right, pal. Talk to you soon, man.
Yes, sir. We'll be in touch real soon, Coach. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
And a huge thanks to Bruce Babashan for spending the time with us today. Guys, we as strength coaches like to talk about stuff when we coordinate like boxing and things like that into what we do. And when I got a world-class boxing coach talking about the importance of strength and conditioning, the role that he sees it within his team, just freaking awesome stuff. I can't thank Bruce enough for his candor and his open and honest sharing. Just fascinating to me. Thank you so much, Coach. And as always, guys, if you enjoyed the talk, please share it to the social media outlet of your choice. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it may be. Guys, the word of mouth is our lifeblood, and I can't thank you enough for all of you that spread the word and share the content, because it really does mean the world to me. If you wouldn't mind hitting that like button, hitting that share button, and spreading the word, I would be greatly appreciative. And as always, thank you for everything that you do for us here at Central Virginia Sport Performance. We will be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.